Picture this. It's the night of September 26, 2002. A ferry, the MV Joola, is making a routine trip off the coast of West Africa. But as a storm brews on the horizon, this ship, which is packed with nearly 2,000 people, is about to vanish from the sea in just a handful of minutes. It would become one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history, even deadlier than the Titanic. And yet, it's a story many of us have never even heard. So, let's get into it. That's a chilling account from Leandri Coley, one of the very few people who lived to tell the tale. Just moments before, the ship's restaurant was filled with life. There was music, dancing. And then, in an instant, the world literally turned upside down. His words put us right there, in the middle of the chaos, in those final terrifying moments. So, this is the question at the heart of it all. How does a modern, German-built ship, one that's operated by the Senegalese Navy, just flip over and capsize so incredibly fast? The answer isn't as simple as just a storm. It's actually a story about geography, about unbelievable negligence, and a rescue effort that came tragically late. To really understand why so many people were on that ship in the first place, you kind of have to look at a map. You see, the Lolala wasn't just another ferry. For thousands of people, it was the only real way to get to the rest of their own country. It was, quite literally, their lifeline. Okay, so check this out. Senegal has this really unique geography. The southern part of the country, a region called Casamance, is completely cut off from the capital city, Dakar, by another entire country, the Gambia. So if you wanted to travel by land, you had to cross 2 international borders or take this huge, long, and often dangerous detour around. For farmers, for families, and especially for students trying to get to university in Dakar, this was a massive problem. And the Joola was the answer. Since it was run by the military, everyone saw it as the safest, the cheapest, and the most dependable way to make that trip. It connected this isolated region to the country's economic and educational center. This ship was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of national unity, a floating bridge. But on this one voyage, that symbol of connection was about to become a tomb. And this is where we see the first and maybe the most shocking failure. The ship was officially licensed to carry 536 passengers, but on that night, it's estimated there were nearly 2,000 people on board. That is almost 4 times its legal limit. Many of them were students heading to Dakar for the new university term. The ship was fatally overcrowded before it even left the dock. But the overcrowding? That was just one piece of the puzzle. It was the first link in a whole chain of terrible decisions that would seal the fate of the Joola and every single person on it. You know, this wasn't some freak accident that nobody could have seen coming. It was a disaster just waiting to happen. The ship had been out of commission for a whole year for repairs and had only been back in service for 2 weeks. Survivors said it was already tilting to one side when it left the port. Worse, the cars on the vehicle deck weren't even tied down. In the hot lower decks, passengers opened the portholes to get some fresh air. And the life jackets? A former officer admitted they were tied up on purpose to stop people from grabbing them during small incidents. Every single one of these points was a catastrophic failure on its own. So with all these problems already in play, the ship sailed straight into a storm. And what happened next was just terrifyingly fast. A whole world of life, music, and people was wiped out in less time than it takes to make a cup of tea. I mean, just look at this timeline. At 10 p.m., everything's fine. The crew radios in, says conditions are good. An hour later, they hit the storm. A huge gust of wind slams into the ship, pushing it over. Then those cars that weren't tied down, they slide to one side, pulling the ship even further. And then water starts flooding in through those open portholes. It was the point of no return. In 5 minutes, the entire ship was upside down in the ocean. There was no time for lifeboats, no time to even send a distress signal. Just chaos. And this is where the horror just gets deeper. The ship didn't sink right away. For hours, it just floated there, an overturned hull in the middle of a dark, stormy sea. This meant that many people who actually survived the initial capsizing were now trapped inside, alive, in pockets of air, with absolutely no way to get out. The first disaster was the ship flipping over. The second disaster was just beginning. Because no distress signal was ever sent, the world had no idea what had just happened. While hundreds of people were fighting for their lives on and inside that ship, help was nowhere in sight. The official response that followed would be defined by a completely devastating and inexplicable delay. The official number of people who died was 1,863. To put that in perspective, that is more people than died on the Titanic. This was the second worst non-military maritime disaster in recorded history. And against that staggering death toll, only 64 people survived. Think about that for a second. Of the more than 600 women on board, just one made it out alive. One. The scale of the loss is just almost impossible to comprehend. This is maybe the most haunting detail of this whole tragedy. When rescuers finally did get to the ship, hours later, they could hear people. They could hear screaming and knocking on the hull from those who were trapped alive inside. But the rescuers didn't have the equipment, the welding torches, the cutting tools, to open the hole and get them out. One of the first divers on the scene, an ex-Navy diver, said he could see passengers through the portholes of the sealed cabins, gesturing to him. But he knew if he opened the doors, the whole ship might sink. None of them were saved. The rescue effort was just a cascade of failures. The first people to actually reach the wreck weren't the Navy or the Coast Guard. It was local fishermen in their small canoes hours after the ship had capsized. It took more than 9 hours for official search planes to even be sent out. The wreck stayed floating upside down all the way until the next afternoon before it finally slipped under the waves, taking the last of the trapped victims with it. In the weeks and months that followed, the immense grief of the nation started to turn into anger. For 2 decades now, the families of the victims have been fighting a painful battle. It's not just a fight to remember their loved ones, but to get some kind of justice for them. And this quote from Idrissa Diallo, a man who lost 3 of his own children in the disaster, really captures what that fight is all about. It was never about money. It's about accountability. It's about making sure that a tragedy that was born from such deep negligence is never, ever forgotten, and that the people responsible are finally held to account. But that accountability has been almost impossible to find. Senegal's own investigation was closed quickly, and it only blamed the ship's dead captain. Because many of the victims were French citizens, a French judge later issued arrest warrants for high-ranking Senegalese officials, which created this huge diplomatic fight. And today, all these years later, not a single living person has been held criminally responsible for the deaths of 1,863 people. But there is, perhaps, a small measure of peace. On the 22nd anniversary of the sinking, a national memorial museum is scheduled to open in Ziguinchor, the same port where that final voyage began. It's a place for remembrance, for education, to make sure that future generations will always know the story of the Joola and the people it carried. And that really brings us to our final big question. This museum is such a vital act of remembrance. It honors the victims, it acknowledges this massive national trauma. But for the families who have fought for over 2 decades, is a memorial without anyone ever being held accountable a true form of justice? It's a question that just hangs over this story, like a quiet echo in the deep waters where the Joola now lies.